Unlike our present age, in which generals and leaders watch safely from afar as ordinary soldiers fight their wars for them, many medieval kings put on armor, picked up swords, and stood shoulder to shoulder with their men in the heat of battle. The Middle Ages was a time when kings who refused to fight could easily lose the respect of their people. Every great medieval king was also a great warrior, a knight in his own right who could inspire courage and strength in his men by riding with them into combat. Today on Real Crusades History, we'll profile 5 of the greatest warrior kings from the High Middle Ages, that is, from roughly 1050 to 1250. Number 5. William the Conqueror. William I of England has long been a controversial figure. His brutal conquest of England has attracted much criticism. But if we're going to talk about medieval kingship, we have to look at William the Conqueror, whose career helped lay the very groundwork for the institution of monarchy in the High Middle Ages. William's father, the Duke of Normandy, died young. Only through ruthless competence did William keep his inheritance. But even before he conquered England, William was already one of Europe's greatest rulers. By 1060, William could command a larger army of knights than any ruler west of the Rhine, including the King of France. A key element to William's power was his patronage of the great Norman monasteries, which fostered learning and produced able administrators, as well as wealth to finance armies. William's scheme to conquer England was far-fetched at best and should have failed. But the Norman Duke had the state power to put it into motion, and his competence attracted allies from across France. Finally, on the field of Hastings, Duke William and his Normans faced the powerful axe-wielding Anglo-Saxon infantry. In the end, the charge of the Normans carried the day, with William himself leading his knights as they broke the enemy lines. William became King of England, and the date of 1066 would reverberate through the centuries. In an age when the power of kings had mostly collapsed, William the Conqueror solidified one of the first strong feudal states, helping to lay the groundwork for the political triumphs of the High Middle Ages. William's bold battlefield victories were matched only by his competence as a statesman. Number 4. Afonso I of Portugal. Afonso transformed his lands from a county into a kingdom, becoming the first king of Portugal. Over the course of his career, he doubled the size of his territory by battling the Moors in the south. Thus, he's a key figure in the Christian Reconquista of the Iberian Peninsula. Afonso was the son of Henry of Burgundy, a French nobleman, and Teresa, Countess of Portugal, a daughter of King Alfonso VI of Leon Castile. From early in his reign, he formed a strong alliance with the Knights Templar, whose mission to battle the enemies of Christendom he recognized as in harmony with his objectives in the Reconquista. Afonso granted the Templars many castles, and even became an associate member of their brotherhood. In 1139, Portugal's southern frontier was attacked by the Almoravids, the Berber warrior dynasty that dominated the Muslim portions of Spain. Afonso responded by rallying his knights and marching south, where he met an enormous Almoravid force near Urique. Though outnumbered, Afonso and his men smashed the Almoravid divisions, winning one of the greatest victories in the history of the Reconquista. By the 1140s, Afonso was capturing considerable territory from the Almoravids, culminating in his crusade to capture Lisbon, which became the capital of Portugal. In addition to his brilliance as a general, Afonso also cultivated the cultural and spiritual life of his kingdom. He is the builder of Alcobaça Monastery, to which he invited the Cistercian order, cultivated by his fellow Burgundian, Bernard of Clairvaux, strengthening Portugal's ties with the monastic flowering of France. Founder of Portugal, associate of the Templars, and hammer of the Almoravids, Afonso, called the Conqueror by historians, is truly one of the outstanding monarchs of the High Middle Ages. Number 3. Baldwin IV, the leper king of Jerusalem. It's one thing to be a great king while healthy, but Baldwin IV, the Crusader king of Jerusalem, achieved incredible success while suffering from the debilitating disease of leprosy. His kingdom was surrounded by the lands of Saladin, the powerful sultan of Egypt and Syria, who was committed to annihilating the Crusader presence in the Holy Land. Although Saladin could muster armies that vastly outnumbered Baldwin's, the leper king stood up to the sultan again and again, and while Baldwin lived, Saladin was powerless to capture Jerusalem. Baldwin's leprosy was discovered when he was a young boy by his tutor, William of Tyre. The news was devastating for the boy's father, King Amalric, and for the kingdom in general. Amalric died young, and Baldwin was crowned king when he was only 13 years old. By then, Saladin had already conquered all of the great Muslim territories surrounding the Crusader kingdom, including the enormously wealthy Egypt, which alone afforded the Sultan an immensity of troops. In 1177, Baldwin was 16 when Saladin launched a massive invasion of the southern kingdom of Jerusalem. Although the bulk of the Crusader forces were in the north at the time, Baldwin assembled a small army, including a contingent of Knights Templar, and launched a counterattack. At the resulting Battle of Montgisard, Baldwin and his knights shattered Saladin's far more numerous forces. The Sultan himself was nearly killed and had to flee for his life on a racing camel. For the duration of his reign, Baldwin ensured that a Crusader army met every attack launched by Saladin. In 1183, when Saladin besieged the fortress of Kerak, Baldwin led his forces to the relief, and Saladin retreated. Baldwin died at the age of 24, by now blinded and severely weakened from the leprosy. Despite his sufferings, he'd been a first-rate warrior king who stood up to a vastly more powerful opponent. It was only after Baldwin's death that Saladin managed to score his major victories against Jerusalem. Number 2. Fernando III of Leon Castile. Canonized as a saint in 1671 by Pope Clement X, Fernando was one of the most successful kings of the medieval era. He secured the permanent union of Leon and Castile, and he achieved the most widespread conquest of Moorish territory in the history of the Spanish Reconquista. Fernando was a king devoted to his people. He was careful not to overtax his subjects. Famously, he said he feared the curse of one poor widow far more than a great army of Saracens. Fernando's grandfather, Alfonso VIII, was one of the primary Christian leaders at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212. That victory shattered the power of the Almohads, who at the time dominated the Muslim portions of Spain. Fernando energetically pressed home this advantage. Between 1228 and 1248, the king executed the most expansive Reconquista campaign in history, with the bulk of the old Moorish strongholds falling to him one by one. Most spectacularly, Fernando captured the ancient Moorish capital of Córdoba in 1236, after a band of his knights penetrated the city in a surprise assault. The king rode swiftly to press the siege, which ended with him sitting upon the ancient throne of the caliphs. In the next decade, Fernando would take Sevilla, yet another iconic Moorish bastion. By his death in 1252, the king had dramatically expanded his territory and reduced the Moors to a tiny strip in the southeast, centered around Granada. Number 1. Richard the Lionheart. Richard I of England was the son of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II of England. He was a teenager when his father put the military of Aquitaine under his command, with orders to subdue the rebellious barons. In this early episode, Richard exceeded his father's expectations. On his father's death in 1189, Richard gained England and around half of what is today France. At once, Richard committed himself to a crusade to aid the Kingdom of Jerusalem, recently conquered by the Sultan Saladin. Within a month of his arrival in the Holy Land, Acre, the most important Palestinian port, fell to him. At the Battle of Arsuf in 1191, Richard's tightly organized army withstood relentless attacks by Saladin's more numerous forces, and Richard led several cavalry charges that smashed Saladin's lines. In 1192, Saladin's army overwhelmed a Christian garrison holding Jaffa. Richard responded by storming Jaffa's beach and hurling back Saladin's forces. Within Jaffa itself, Richard fought side by side with his men, clearing the city of Saladin's troops. A counterattack by Saladin was then soundly defeated by Richard, and Jaffa was secured. Richard's victories over Saladin restored Christian rule of the Palestinian coast and prevented Saladin from carrying out his plan to eliminate the Crusader presence in the Holy Land. Historian John Gillingham says that Richard's reputation as king was high among his contemporaries. Gillingham also describes Richard as a fine administrator who knew the political, diplomatic, and military value of open-handedness. Historian J.F. Verbruggen says that Richard was concerned for the personal welfare of his men. He took care to provide for them properly, allowed no unreasonably long marches, imposed strict discipline to protect the whole column of march, supervised the execution of orders personally, and at the same time was ready for any unseen eventuality. The Muslim chronicler Ibn al-Athir says that Richard's courage, shrewdness, energy, and patience made him the most outstanding man of his times. Richard was a brilliant administrator whose competence ensured the integrity of the Angevin territories during his life. His early death in 1199 was a disaster for the Angevin Empire, since his successor, his brother John, was weak and incompetent. John Gillingham writes, "Far from being one of the worst kings ever to sit on the English throne, Richard was, in fact, one of the ablest.